Okay. Now, unfortunately, I had to title the video as such because for some strange reason that I cannot comprehend, the original parameters did not function properly. So, I'm not sure if I made a clinical error or whatever, but here is the point I was going to make, and this is actually the purpose of the video. So, here's a question I just want to pose. It's just an interesting question, it's just a thought experiment, and you can take it or leave it however you feel, just take it how you feel because we all have to make our own journeys, right? We have to do things that sometimes other people don't like, our friends and such, you know. So, my question to you is this. Well, the question I would like you to think about is this. Just keep thinking about it and thinking about it until it annoys the heck out of you, I guess, and then you can be like, whatever. So, my question is this. What's wrong with self diagnosing? Is it actually wrong to self diagnose? I guess we could just call this predetermination. The predetermined things that we figure out about ourselves. You could also just call it self reflection. Um, now, well, I'm using the term self diagnosing for a reason, by the way, because we're told not to do it. Now, my question for you is that really different from self reflecting? Like, we're told it is, but is it? Like, if you looked up the strict definition, yes, it might appear that way, but I don't think it is. Like, I don't really think it is because, the experts are always going to have to do that, try to sound technical. Like, if you were to, like, if I say I broke a bone, a medical doctor is going to say something much more complex. It means the same thing, but it's just a different viewpoint, you could argue. It's not better information. It's not like it's really different information. It's just worded in a much more what they call clinical sense. So they are considered professionals when they can speak clinical terms. And psychology does the same thing, basically. So, my question is, we'll word it a little differently here, but I want you to keep in the back of your mind that when I refer to self-reflection, self-diagnosing in my mind is the same damn thing. So my question for you is, why is self-reflection wrong? And we're going to just say that self-diagnosing and self-reflection are the same thing. Now let's consider the fact, and I want you to consider the fact that you are stuck with you. You are the only person you know. You're the first person you know, and you are the only thoughts you will typically have. I said typically for a reason, in case the psychic is watching this or whatever. But, so, you have to be able to consider that if I'm stuck with myself, yes, at an early age, I'm not going to know who I am. And that makes sense, right? A kid does not generally know who they are. I mean, they can't. They don't know enough. That makes sense logically. So, at a young age, self reflection is not even possible for them. And I will also say that for some people, self reflection is very hard or impossible. That's true. So, in a sense, you could argue self reflection, the statement of you cannot self reflect or self diagnose, has to be out there for those people. That does not mean it's impossible. It just means that it has to be said because there will always be those people, But that's true of anything, isn't it? Like, isn't everything that way? Like, isn't everything like you can or you can't? Like, how many things are universally, yeah, we can all do that? Like, some people can do math, some people can't, and I'm in that category. But also, some people can do English really well, like I can, like writing and all that. Others can't. But at the same time, I don't actually know a lot of the grammar terminologies, the technicalities, the clinical terminologies of English, like the complex whatever stuff, the terminology they use for punctuation and stuff. I don't even know that stuff. I tried to look at it and it made no sense to me. Yet somehow, if I were to generally look at a sentence, I can figure out where things go. I just this is a different working knowledge. You can have, for example, the gift of music without knowing the clinical diagnosis, like the technical term for the paperwork or the tunes or the complex. Like this stuff is considered the professional version of what some would just call the obvious way. There's always going to be those geniuses in your fields who just intuitively know how to do this stuff. Those guys who are just good at it naturally, like savants and all that, or geniuses. Some people are just naturally good at these things, so they just do them. But if they are able to understand the complex terminologies, they probably will, because it'll make them appear more professional in words. But some of them can't, and yet they can just do it. They just do it without, and society seems to sometimes shun that because they want us to go to college or whatnot for whatever reason. But it's interesting, isn't it, to self-reflect like that? And it seems like anytime we go against these common observed rules, we're violating their version of free speech, doesn't it? Doesn't it kind of seem that way? Because, I don't know, it's an interesting thought, because they just like to, I don't know what they want to do, but it's an interesting thought, because you could really think about the fact that, now we'll go back to the self-reflection. So you could argue that you can think, let's say you're much older and you can self-reflect very well because you've known yourself that well, Yeah, you can take advice. And if you are good at self-reflecting, if you actually literally are good at what actual self-reflection would look like, you will be able to do that. It's not impossible to know who you are. It's not impossible. Because you have to do that anyway, don't you? Don't you make determinations like that anyway to know anything? Like, an intelligent person has to be able to do that. And if they can't, they will be susceptible to manipulation anyway. So what's the point in trying to say, don't think for yourself? Please don't think for yourself. Let other people think for you. Well, if everyone was doing that, no one would be thinking. There's some level to which those who are capable need to be thinking for themselves. Because if you are not thinking for yourself, you are actually more dangerous to yourself. Because you will literally not know the difference between good and bad advice. You need to be discerning for that reason. The whole point of knowledge should be to determine its use to you. Why it's good, what it can do for you, why you need it. Not just blindly accepting it because people are throwing it at you. Not all advice is good advice. Not everything that people tell you is for you. People will never know you as well as you know you, or at least how well you could know you, assuming you can self-reflect. This video is focused on those who can, like myself. I do take advice. I take a ton of advice. But I'm getting to the point where I can easily discern if advice is good for me or not. I'm not saying I'm perfect at it because I don't know what I don't know. That's the Dunning-Kruger effect, if you know what that is. And if you don't, you can look it up. But my point is, if you are not able to self-diagnose, then you definitely shouldn't be taking advice anyway. Because you wouldn't know the difference between good advice and bad advice. Well, of course there are exceptions to that if you're young and all that, but this video isn't for those people. This video isn't for children. I'm not going to give children this advice. I would not give my children this advice. I mean, I might give hints at it when they're a little older if I think they're ready, but I will never really know if they're ready. I don't know what they're thinking. I only know what they're doing and saying. They could be saying the opposite of what they're thinking if they're smart enough to do it. I'm not a people expert. I want to be, but I'm not. So, studying psychology does not make me an expert in people. And people who are readily pointing that out, I mean, obviously, there's a risk to anything, right? But even consider that people consider the top of their fields can still be wrong about things. And they still have to be humble enough to listen to you. They still have to be humble enough to hear your story. And they will not be able to give you accurate information if they don't. And they may not even give you accurate information when they do. You might not be telling them everything. They can only work off, no matter how good they are at their job, they will only ever be able to work off what you give them. And when you study psychology long enough, you'll start to know for yourself what that advice should be for you. It's not impossible to self-diagnose if you study psychology like I do. It's not. It's actually a lot easier. They can try to tell you shouldn't do it, but the fact of the matter is that probably just means they're not studying psychology, or they're just saying, you should go to me for your advice. But what if you already know that advice that you would give yourself if you were someone else? That's literally how you can do it. I literally used to write stories like that because I'm a writer. I would write stories, and this was my way of figuring out how I would handle situations. And it would be a way of me figuring out if I'd be right in assessing a situation. I would just hit it from every angle I could think of, but I would assume it was happening to someone else. I would ask myself, what advice would I want in that situation? And that would be the answer I would give myself. And then I'd ask myself, what are the consequences? So I wouldn't automatically assume that my assessment was correct. I would force myself to realize any flaws. And I would just keep cycling that until I reached a conclusion as to what the actual advice should be. So when you start getting to the point where you can do that, you're literally doing the same thing that they call self-diagnosing. That's essentially what that would be at that point. I mean, what's the difference? It's a clinical study. It's a technical term. That's all it is. It's just words. This clinical word, psychology, it's just a word. The technical terms that they use in psychology are just words. Just like math precepts are ultimately just symbols and numbers. It's not that they don't have meaning, but math is a little more complicated than that. So, since I'm not a math person, I won't go into that. I'll stick to what I know so I actually sound like I know what I'm talking about. And that's psychology. So, yeah, we're all going to self-reflect and self-diagnose. We have to. And if we can't, we can be controlled by those who do. Or just by those who want to control others. It really makes no sense to tell someone they can't self-reflect. I mean, especially someone like me, or someone who's better at this than I am. And there are plenty of people better at this than I am. I watch them constantly to learn how to be better at this. And I'm relatively young, although I am in my 30s. But what do you expect? We all have to go on these journeys. We all have to learn who we are. And I tend to surround myself with much older people, so I will learn faster. Most of my friends are much older than me. Most of them. My closest friend right now is 5 years older than me. Well, one of my closest friends, I should say. And so it's not really inherently logical to tell people they shouldn't self-reflect or self-diagnose. They are just clinical terms. And you actually need to be able to discern the meaning of clinical terms. Now, of course, all this is extrapolation because I didn't actually look up the definitions, but it makes sense because basically, if I were to just say, learn how to think for yourself, I don't have to define what I mean by that. You all know what it means to think. And you all know that yourself is referring to who you are on the inside. And I'm not talking about guts and gore. I'm talking about the actual you. Whatever you would call that, the soul, the spirit, whatever. Or however you view yourself. Thinking for yourself allows you to self-reflect. And if other people tell you how to think, they are diagnosing you. So if you combine that in the right way, you are essentially saying, I can self-diagnose. All I had to do was see myself as someone else. And I'm good at it because I used to believe it. I literally separated myself from myself. I convinced myself I had multiple personality disorder. I didn't, but I did believe it. And I literally became two different people, kind of. And each one had different characteristics. And that allowed me to figure out who I was. I separated certain characteristics from others and attributed them as different people entirely. I could switch between those people, and there were people who could tell which one I was. The people that really knew me, they knew who I was at what point. It was that obvious to them. Like they could actually feel it almost, like it was a sensing thing or something. So, yeah, you can definitely self reflect and self diagnose. There's no harm in that if you're actually good at it. But my advice to you, if you're not that good at it, would probably be to just figure out who you are on the inside. If you don't know how to self reflect, just focus on knowing what you want out of life. I would say just figure out who you are. At least know what you want. At least know what your purpose is in this life, whatever you think that is. For me, it's God and Jesus and Christianity. But if you don't decide to follow Jesus, which I do recommend you do, but if you don't, because not everyone does, and I understand that there's reasons for that, but if you do decide to follow him, it's a good, rewarding path, and he helps you self-reflect as well. So there's no harm in letting God into your life and giving him your problems and letting him tell you how to live. There's no harm in that because he is the ultimate good. But yes, there are a lot of things you have to sort out to actually know that for sure. So I'm not going to tell you how to live your life. But if you do decide to seek God out, just be careful that you do it wholeheartedly and don't compromise in your journey because there's a lot of deception, a lot of false prophets, a lot of propagandic biblical things, a lot of lies, all that stuff exists. So it's not going to be easy to sort through that if you're not good at it. And there's going to be a lot of people telling you not to bother. There's going to be a lot of people rejecting you for it. And it's going to be hard to get certain jobs if you believe in it. But it is ultimately rewarding. Like there is a reason to do it. But anyway, self-reflection, self-diagnosing, they're basically the same thing. Thinking for yourself, learning who you are. That's all it is. And you don't need to shun it. You don't need to be afraid of it. And no one can really tell who you are better than you are anyway. Better than you anyway. You're always stuck with yourself, and they're always stuck with themselves. They are not reading your mind and knowing your thoughts. All they have to go off of is what you do and what you say. It is not inherently logical to assume they know more than you, even if they've been alive much longer than you. It just means they'll be better at reading the outward signs. It does not mean that they know what you're thinking. And a wise person will always admit that they don't know what you're thinking. So, take the advice, apply it however you can, but know if it's good advice. Be sure you're aware that the advice is actually sound and stable before you take it into consideration. If you can't do that, then no, you should not be self-diagnosing. I think the tendency in self-diagnosing is that we can't do it because we can't know ourselves. But that is a myth. We can know ourselves. We should know ourselves, and it is healthy to know ourselves. But that does not mean we ignore all advice. It means we need to be discerning with advice. We need to know what it's for, how it can help us, and when it can't. So that's just all I wanted to say for now.